Jack had been assigned to a simple mission. As a young human soldier, he was used to the risks of space exploration, but this mission felt different. It was his first solo operation, and the planet he was sent to was known for its unpredictable weather and hostile environment. The planet, Vexar, had a rugged mountainous landscape, with thick forests and deep valleys. The air was thin, and the gravity was slightly stronger than Earth's, which made movement a bit more difficult. Jack's task was straightforward: explore the area, gather information, and report back to the fleet. His ship was small but efficient, designed for these types of reconnaissance missions. He had no idea that the day would end up changing his life. As he made his way through the dense forest, Jack saw something strange in the distance. The sky had been overcast, and the thick trees blocked out most of the sunlight. But through the gaps, he noticed the faint outline of a large structure. It didn't look like anything Jack had seen before. It was sleek and alien, with smooth metallic surfaces and intricate carvings. Curiosity led him closer, and he soon realized it was a wrecked ship, its hull battered and broken. He approached, cautiously, unsure of what he might find. The ship was unlike anything from his own world, and it had clearly been in a violent crash. Parts of the ship were scattered across the ground, and there were scorch marks on the trees around it. As Jack explored the wreckage, his boots crunching on the dry ground, he heard a faint sound. Someone or something was alive. His heart raced. He quickly crouched behind a large rock and peered around it, searching for any signs of movement. There, by the wreck, was a figure, an alien woman, injured and unconscious. She lay on the ground, her body partially covered by her armor, which was dented and cracked. Her breathing was shallow, but she was still alive. Jack felt a rush of conflicting emotions. On one hand, he knew he should get help immediately. He wasn't trained for medical emergencies, and this alien was clearly in danger. On the other hand, there was something about her strange yet almost graceful appearance, that drew him in. She was like nothing he had ever seen before. Her skin was a smooth, pale green, and her long, dark hair was tangled and matted with dirt. Despite the damage to her armor, she radiated strength and determination. After a moment's hesitation, Jack decided he couldn't just leave her there. He couldn't let someone, no matter who or what they were, die because he was too afraid to act. He approached her cautiously, speaking softly to try and avoid startling her. "Hey, are you okay? Can you hear me?" The woman's eyes fluttered, open, and for a moment she stared at Jack, her expression unreadable. Then her gaze shifted to the dent in her armor and the scratches on her face. She gritted her teeth, clearly in pain. Her voice, when she spoke, was low and rough, with a hint of defiance. "I can take care of myself." Jack stepped back, surprised by her strength, even in her injured state. "I'm not here to hurt you. I'm here to help." For a long moment, the woman simply stared at him as if weighing her options. Then, without a word, she raised one arm and gestured to her damaged armor. "Fix it," she demanded, her voice filled with authority. "I don't need your pity." Jack frowned. He wasn't exactly sure what she meant by "fix it," but he was good with his hands. He had worked on his ship's equipment before, so he figured he could handle repairing the dent in her armor. He knelt beside her, pulling out his tools, which were small and compact, designed for situations like this. The woman didn't say anything more as he worked, but he noticed her eyes watching his every move. For the next few minutes, Jack carefully worked on the dent in her armor. It was tough, and the material was unlike anything he had ever encountered. The armor seemed to have a life of its own, adjusting slightly as he worked, as if it was sensing his touch. The task was slow, but Jack's experience with machinery made it easier. As he worked, he couldn't help but notice the woman's sharp features, the intensity in her eyes, her strong jawline, and the way she carried herself. even in her weakened state. When he finished, he looked up at her. There. It's not perfect, but it should hold up for now. The woman slowly sat up, her movements stiff. She looked at her repaired armor, running her fingers over the smooth surface. Then, to Jack's surprise, she smiled slightly. Not a full smile, but something that hinted at appreciation. "You have a warrior's hands," she whispered, her voice softer than before. Jack didn't quite know how to respond. He was used to people being skeptical of him, especially in the military, where he wasn't considered the most skilled fighter. But here, in this alien place, it felt different. The woman's words lingered in the air between them, and for a moment Jack felt a sense of pride that he hadn't experienced in a long time. "I'm Jack," he said, extending a hand. "And you are?" The woman didn't take his hand. Instead, she stood up, her posture straight and strong despite the pain. "Zara," she said simply, "Princess of the Skarath people." Jack felt a mix of surprise and awe. He was helping a royal, a warrior princess from an alien race. He had no idea how he had ended up in this situation, but something told him this encounter was far from over. Zara's gaze shifted, and her expression hardened once again. "You shouldn't have helped me. You have no idea who I am or what I've done." Jack wasn't sure what to say to that. He had no clue who she was or why she was here, but he knew one thing for certain. He wasn't going to leave her behind. "Maybe I don't know who you are," Jack said, "but I know one thing for sure. You're not alone anymore." Zara regarded him silently for a moment, her eyes narrowing slightly. She seemed to consider his words, then gave a slight nod. "We'll see, human." With that, she turned and began walking away, her armor now repaired, though still bearing the scars of the battle that had brought her to this planet. Jack followed, unsure of what lay ahead, but feeling the weight of a decision he had made. Something told him that this was just the beginning of an unexpected journey, one that would test both of them in ways they couldn't yet understand. Zara moved with the grace and precision of a trained warrior. Her steps were confident, and though the pain from her wounds was still evident, she didn't show it. The sun had started to break through the thick clouds, casting a soft light over the rugged landscape of Vexar. Jack followed her, keeping a respectful distance as she led him deeper into the forest. "Where are we going?" Jack asked, trying to keep up with her swift pace. Zara glanced over her shoulder, her eyes narrowing slightly. "You think I need your help? I told you before. Stay out of my way." Jack's heart sank. The harsh words weren't surprising, but they still stung. He didn't understand what he had done to earn her distrust. All he had done was try to help. But Zara, it seemed, didn't trust anyone easily. Her coldness was like a wall, and no matter how much Jack tried to break through, it remained impenetrable. The two walked in silence for a while, the only sounds being the crunch of the forest floor beneath their feet and the occasional chirp of alien wildlife. Jack couldn't help but wonder about her. She was a warrior, strong and proud. But beneath that exterior, there had to be more. Zara was not the type of person to reveal her vulnerabilities easily, but Jack had seen enough to know she was more than just her armor. Eventually, they reached a small clearing. It was surrounded by tall trees, and at the center was a large rock that seemed to have been placed there deliberately. Zara stopped and turned to face Jack. "This is where we train," she said, her voice steady but firm. "You want to prove yourself, human? You want to show me you are worth my time? Fight me." Jack blinked, taken aback. "What? Fight you?" Zara's lips curled into a faint, challenging smile. "Yes, fight me. Prove you are a warrior. If you can beat me, if you can land even a single blow, I might consider you more than just a nuisance." Jack's mind raced. He wasn't a soldier like her. He didn't have her combat experience, nor did he have the strength she clearly possessed. But he wasn't the type to back down from a challenge. He had grown up fighting for what he wanted, even if it meant going up against someone stronger or faster. "Okay," he said, taking a deep breath. "Let's do it." Zara raised an eyebrow, clearly amused. "You are brave, I'll give you that. But you should know you will lose." Jack didn't respond. Instead, he lowered himself into a defensive stance. He wasn't sure how this would go, but he'd learned to trust his instincts. Zara wasted no time. She lunged at him with lightning speed, her fists aimed at his chest. Jack barely managed to dodge, stepping to the side just in time to avoid the impact. The force of her punch left the air crackling, and Jack could feel the power behind her every movement. She came at him again, this time with a low sweep aimed at his legs. Jack jumped, narrowly avoiding the attack. His heart pounded in his chest, but he kept his focus. He knew he had to stay calm. If he let his nerves get the best of him, this would be over in seconds. Zara didn't give him a moment to catch his breath. She moved in fast, her strikes swift and precise. Jack blocked as best as he could, but each blow pushed him back. He could feel the strength in her attacks, each one landing with a force that would have knocked him off his feet if he weren't so quick. She paused for a moment, assessing him. "Not bad," she said, her voice colder than before. "You're quick. I'll give you that. But speed alone won't save you." Jack wiped the sweat from his brow and took a step back, trying to steady his breathing. He could feel his muscles beginning to strain under the pressure. Zara, on the other hand, seemed completely at ease. She was a natural, every movement calculated and efficient. Jack knew he couldn't outfight her, but maybe he didn't need to. He'd seen something in her earlier, a certain hesitation when he repaired her armor. Something told him that she wasn't just testing his fighting skills. She was testing his character. He needed to outsmart her. Without warning, Jack darted to the side, using his momentum to slide behind Zara. She whirled around just in time to see Jack's fist coming toward her. It was a feint. He wasn't trying to land a hit. Instead, he was trying to create an opening. As expected, Zara blocked the punch with ease, but that was exactly what Jack had hoped for. In that split second, he used the distraction to sweep her legs out from under her. Zara hit the ground with a loud thud, momentarily stunned. Jack immediately stepped back, his chest heaving as he caught his breath. He had done it. He had landed a strike. It wasn't much, but it was enough. Zara sat up slowly, her eyes wide with surprise. For the first time since Jack had met her, there was a flicker of something other than coldness in her gaze. Maybe it was respect. Maybe it was a sign that she was beginning to see him as more than just a human. She didn't speak for a moment, then she stood up and brushed the dirt off her armor. "You're lucky," she said, her voice quieter now, but still firm. "Most humans would have run by now. But you have guts." Jack grinned, wiping the sweat from his brow. "I'm not about to back down from a challenge." Zara's lips curled slightly, and for the first time, Jack saw a hint of a smile on her face. It wasn't much, but it was progress. "You've proven you're not just a nuisance. You're more than that." Jack's heart swelled with pride. He hadn't won the fight. Not really. But he had earned her respect, and in that moment, he knew this was just the beginning. There was more to this journey than he had initially thought, and Zara, this warrior princess, was at the center of it. "Good," Zara said, her tone shifting back to its usual commanding presence. "We'll see if you're truly worthy of my time. There's still much more for you to prove." Jack nodded, ready for whatever came next. He had a feeling the real test was just beginning. The days passed in a blur of survival, as Jack and Zara continued their journey through the wilds of Vexar. The dense forest gave way to towering mountains, and the terrain became even more difficult to navigate. Zara led the way, her natural instincts guiding her through the treacherous landscape, while Jack followed behind, trying to keep up. Despite their differences, a strange sense of camaraderie began to form between them. Though Zara still maintained her distance, Jack could see the small moments when her demeanor softened, if only for a second. When she thought he wasn't looking, she would glance back at him, her sharp eyes assessing him not with the same coldness as before, but with something closer to curiosity. Jack, in turn, found himself studying her more and more. Zara was a warrior, but there was so much more to her. She had a quiet strength, a pride that ran deeper than her royal blood. Jack had never met anyone like her before. The food they carried was running low, and the nights had become colder. Zara, despite her pride, seemed reluctant to acknowledge how much she needed help. Jack, however, knew that if they didn't find a way to ration their supplies, they would soon run out of food and water. One evening, as the sun dipped behind the horizon, casting long shadows over the forest, Jack decided to speak up. "Zara," he began cautiously, "we need to find more supplies. I don't think we're going to make it much longer on what we have left." Zara didn't respond immediately. She continued walking, her steps light and purposeful. It was clear she had heard him, but she wasn't ready to admit that they were in trouble. Finally, after a long pause, she spoke, her voice low but steady. "I know," she said, her words sharp, "but I don't trust you to handle things like that." Jack wasn't surprised. Her trust was something that had to be earned, and he knew that it would take time. Still, he didn't back down. "I'm not asking you to trust me," he replied. "But if we don't work together, we won't make it out of here." Zara stopped in her tracks, her back still turned to him. "You think I need your help?" Her tone was cold, but Jack could hear the faintest tremor in her voice, something he hadn't noticed before. Was it fear? Doubt? "I think you need someone who can think outside the box," Jack said, stepping forward to stand beside her. "You're a great warrior, Zara, but this isn't just about fighting. It's about surviving." There was a long silence before Zara finally turned to face him. Her expression was unreadable, but Jack could see the conflict in her eyes. She was still a warrior at heart, and accepting help from anyone, let alone a human, was something she clearly struggled with. "Fine," she said after a moment, "but this doesn't mean I trust you." "I wouldn't expect you to," Jack said, a small smile tugging at his lips. "Let's just get through this, and then we'll figure out the rest." Together they set off again, Jack taking the lead for the first time. He didn't know where they were going, but his instincts told him that the river they had crossed earlier might be their best bet. It was the only water source they had seen in days, and Jack hoped there was more to find there. The journey was slow, the forest thickening around them as they ventured deeper into the unknown. Zara remained vigilant, her eyes constantly scanning their surroundings for any signs of danger. Jack, for his part, kept his focus on the path ahead, but he could feel the weight of the situation pressing down on him. They were in unfamiliar territory, and the harshness of the environment was beginning to take its toll on both of them. By the time they reached the river, it was late afternoon, and the light was beginning to fade. Zara knelt by the water, cupping her hands to drink. Jack followed suit, drinking deeply, grateful for the cool relief. For a moment, they simply sat there in silence, the sound of the flowing water filling the air. It felt peaceful, almost as though they were in a different world. "I don't know how much longer we can keep this up," Jack said, breaking the silence. "The food's gone and the cold is starting to get to me." Zara didn't answer immediately. Instead, she looked around, her gaze piercing the forest as though searching for something. Finally, she spoke. "There are creatures in these woods. Dangerous ones. If we don't find shelter soon, we might not survive the night." Jack's heart skipped a beat. He hadn't considered that there could be more dangers lurking in the shadows. "What kind of creatures?" he asked, his voice tight with concern. "Predators," Zara said simply. "They hunt in packs. We need to find higher ground. It'll give us a better chance of seeing them before they get too close." Without another word, she stood up and began to walk toward the edge of the river where the terrain rose into a steep hill. Jack followed, his mind racing. He had known that their journey was dangerous, but he hadn't anticipated the possibility of wild predators. Zara, though, seemed unfazed. Her warrior instincts kicked in, and she moved with the grace of someone who had faced far worse challenges. The climb was exhausting, and by the time they reached the top, the sun had nearly set. They found a small clearing, and Zara immediately began to gather what little wood they could find for a fire. Jack helped, his hands shaking from both the cold and the strain of the climb. As they worked together, Jack couldn't help but feel a sense of pride. He had proven himself useful, and Zara was starting to see him as more than just a burden. That night, as they sat around the fire, the crackling flames casting long shadows across their faces, Zara spoke again. "You're different from the others," she said, her voice quieter than usual. "Most humans I've met would have run by now, but you stayed." Jack nodded. "I don't run from challenges, and I don't leave people behind. You've got your pride, Zara. I get that, but I'm not going anywhere. We're in this together now." Zara studied him for a moment, her eyes softening. For a fleeting moment, Jack thought he saw something like respect in her gaze. "Together then," she said, her tone a little warmer than before. "Let's survive this." And for the first time since they had met, Zara seemed to accept him. Not as a warrior, but as an ally. Jack knew the road ahead would be long and dangerous, but something had shifted between them. They were no longer just two strangers thrown together by chance. They were an unlikely team, bound by the shared goal of survival. And Jack had a feeling that together, they might just make it out of Vexar alive. The days seemed to stretch on endlessly as Jack and Zara continued their journey through the wilderness of Vexar. The cold was biting, and the forest had become even more unwelcoming. Zara's eyes never seemed to relax, constantly scanning their surroundings, her senses sharp and alert. Jack had learned to stay close, following her lead without question. He had become attuned to her every move, understanding that her survival instincts were his best chance of making it out alive. One evening, as the wind howled through the trees, and the temperature dropped further, Zara stopped suddenly, raising a hand to signal Jack to stay quiet. Jack froze, instinctively glancing around for any signs of danger. He saw nothing, just the shadows of the forest stretching out before them. "Something's not right," Zara whispered, her voice low and tense. Her hand tightened around the hilt of the dagger she carried. "We're being watched." Jack's heart skipped a beat. He had grown used to the sounds of the forest, the chirps of strange creatures, the rustling of leaves in the wind. But now, all he could hear was the pounding of his own heartbeat. Zara motioned for him to follow her as she moved stealthily through the underbrush, keeping to the shadows. Jack did his best to stay quiet, his breath shallow as he followed her. They moved for what felt like hours, carefully avoiding any open spaces, keeping to the dense thickets where they were least likely to be seen. Finally, after what seemed like an eternity, they reached a small ridge. Zara crouched down, signaling for Jack to do the same. They both peered over the edge, their eyes narrowing as they observed the clearing below. At first, Jack saw nothing but trees and rocks. But then he spotted movement. Several figures, cloaked in dark garments, were moving between the trees. Zara's jaw tightened. "They're here." Jack couldn't tell who they were or what their intentions were, but the menacing presence of the figures made his stomach churn. He had no doubt that Zara was right. These weren't just ordinary travelers or explorers. These people had a purpose. "Who are they?" Jack whispered, his voice barely audible. Zara's eyes remained fixed on the figures below. Raiders! They've been known to pillage and destroy villages. They're dangerous. We need to get out of here now. Jack nodded, his mind racing. He had no experience with raiders or any kind of hostile forces like this, but Zara's warning was enough to make him understand the gravity of the situation. He trusted her judgment. Zara stood up slowly, signaling for Jack to do the same. We'll take a different route, she said, her voice steady. We'll avoid them. Just as they were about to move, one of the raiders looked up, his sharp eyes scanning the ridge. Jack's heart raced, and for a moment it felt like time had slowed. He barely managed to duck behind the rocks before the raider's gaze locked on him. Zara, quick as ever, pulled him down, hiding both of them behind the cover of the ridge. The raider's gaze swept the area, lingering for a moment longer than Jack was comfortable with. His breath caught in his throat as he tried to stay as still as possible. Zara, however, seemed perfectly calm, her eyes narrowing as she waited for the raider to lose interest. The raider eventually turned away, and Zara exhaled sharply. She turned to Jack, her voice now urgent. We need to move, they've seen us. Without waiting for a response, she began to move, and Jack followed, his legs burning from the sudden sprint. The two of them made their way through the forest, dodging branches and ducking low to avoid being seen. Jack's mind raced as he tried to process everything that had just happened. He had been trained for combat, sure, but he had never faced a group like this before. They ran for what felt like hours, weaving through the trees until the sounds of the raiders faded behind them. Eventually they slowed, coming to a small clearing where they could finally catch their breath. Zara collapsed onto a fallen log, her expression tense but controlled. Jack sat beside her, wiping the sweat from his brow. That was too close, Jack said, his voice shaky. Zara didn't respond at first. She was still staring ahead, her eyes distant. Finally, she spoke, her voice low and measured. This isn't over. They won't stop looking for us. We're not safe yet. Jack nodded, understanding the weight of her words. They had escaped this time, but the threat of the raiders was still looming over them. They had no idea how many of them there were or how far they had spread across the planet. All Jack knew was that they couldn't stay where they were for long. We need a plan, Jack said, glancing at Zara. She turned her gaze toward him, her eyes narrowing as if she were sizing him up. You think you're ready to fight them? She asked, her tone skeptical. Jack met her gaze, his mind made up. I didn't come this far just to run. We need to take the fight to them. If we keep running, they'll catch us eventually. Zara was silent for a long moment, her expression unreadable. Jack could tell that she was considering his words, weighing the options. He had no idea what had happened to her in the past, but he could see the warrior in her, the leader who was always calculating her next move. He knew that her pride would never let her back down from a challenge, no matter how difficult. Finally, she nodded. We'll find a way to turn this around, but you need to trust me. I've faced worse than this, and I will not let them take us down. Jack felt a surge of respect for her. She was a warrior, through and through. He had no doubt that, with her leading them, they would find a way to fight back. But he also knew that they couldn't do it alone. Zara had already proven her strength, but now it was time for him to prove his worth as well. What's the plan? Jack asked, eager to take action. Zara stood up and began to pace, her mind working quickly. We'll gather information, find their camp, and strike when they least expect it. But we need to be smart. If we charge in blindly, we'll only get ourselves killed. Jack stood as well, determination in his eyes. I'm ready. Let's do this. Zara glanced at him, a flicker of something, maybe approval, maybe something else, passing through her expression. She didn't say anything, but Jack could tell that she had made up her mind. They were partners now, for better or worse. Together they would face the raiders. and together they would fight for their survival. The forest had grown eerily quiet, as if the very trees were holding their breath. Jack and Zara had spent the last few hours in careful silence, moving stealthily toward the raiders' camp. They had learned from their previous encounter if they were going to face this threat, they needed to be smarter, more calculated. The element of surprise would be their greatest advantage. Zara led the way, her eyes always scanning the horizon, her senses alert to every little sound. Jack followed closely, his heart beating fast as they approached the raider camp. The trees thinned out as they moved, the underbrush becoming less dense. Through the gaps in the trees, Jack could see the flickering glow of campfires, the faint shadows of figures moving around the edges of the camp. It was clear that the raiders were settling in for the night, and their movements seemed casual, unaware of the threat that was slowly closing in on them. Zara stopped, motioning for Jack to crouch down beside her. "We'll wait until night fully falls. The cover of darkness will help us. We need to know how many of them there are before we make our move." Jack nodded, his mind racing. This was it. They were about to confront the very people who had chased them, who had made their survival a constant struggle. He felt a mixture of nervousness and determination. He wasn't a soldier like Zara, but he had learned quickly that sometimes survival came down to a choice: take action or be destroyed. As the night deepened, the camp grew quieter. The firelight cast long shadows, and the sounds of the forest began to fade into the background. Zara's eyes flickered with the calm, focused intensity of a seasoned warrior. Jack admired that about her, her ability to stay composed under pressure, to think clearly when others would have panicked. "How many?" Jack whispered. Zara's gaze never wavered from the camp. "I count 5, she said quietly. "But they're armed and likely well-trained. We can't take them head-on." Jack was silent for a moment, thinking. He wasn't a strategist, but he understood that brute force wasn't always the answer. "What if we could get the drop on them?" he suggested. "Set a trap. Maybe take out a few before they know what's happening?" Zara turned to look at him, her eyes narrowing slightly. "You're not as foolish as you look, human." Jack couldn't help but smile at the rare compliment. "Thanks, I think." Zara's expression softened, though only for a second. "I've been thinking the same thing. We set a trap, draw them into the forest, then we strike." The plan sounded risky, but Jack trusted Zara's instincts. If anyone could pull it off, it was her. "All right," he said, his voice steady. "Let's do it." They spent the next hour carefully moving through the trees, setting up traps, simple snares and obstacles designed to slow the raiders down and force them into a more favorable position. Jack had never set traps like this before, but Zara showed him quickly how to use the environment to their advantage. He worked fast, his hands trembling slightly from both the cold and the tension, but Zara was always by his side, guiding him with quiet efficiency. As the final trap was set, Zara looked at Jack, her expression hardening. "It's time," she said simply. They moved back into the shadows, waiting for the raiders to wander into their trap. Jack's mind raced as they crouched low, the sounds of the raiders' voices growing louder with each passing second. They were close now, too close. Suddenly, a shout echoed through the night. A raider, spotting one of the traps, called out to his comrades. "What's this? Looks like someone's been busy." Jack's heart skipped a beat. The moment of surprise was gone. They had to act quickly. Zara was already on the move, moving with the grace and speed of a predator. She was silent, barely a shadow among the trees. Jack followed her, his body moving on instinct. The raiders, now alerted to something, being wrong, began to fan out, searching the woods for any signs of movement. But they were too late. Zara struck first. With a fluid motion, she leapt from the shadows, taking down one of the raiders in a single powerful move. Jack watched in awe as she disarmed the man effortlessly, using his own momentum against him. She moved like a storm, quick and deadly, taking out another raider before he could even draw his weapon. Jack, feeling the adrenaline surge through him, joined in. He wasn't as fast or skilled as Zara, but he had learned enough to fight. He grabbed a nearby stick, using it to knock a third raider off balance, allowing Zara to finish him off. The other two raiders, realizing they were being ambushed, began to retreat, but it was too late. The traps they had set slowed them down, giving Zara and Jack the time they needed to finish the job. In just minutes, the raiders were defeated, lying unconscious on the ground, tied up in the very traps they had set. Jack stood over one of them, breathing heavily, his heart still racing. He couldn't believe it was over. Zara, though, was already moving toward the leader of the group, her eyes cold and calculating. "What do we do with them?" Jack asked, stepping up beside her. Zara looked down at the leader, her expression hard. "We take them to their camp," she said. "We let their people know that we're not afraid." Jack nodded, though a part of him wondered if they were making a mistake. What if this was only the beginning? What if the raiders had reinforcements? But he trusted Zara. If she thought this was the right move, then he would follow her lead. As they dragged the raiders back toward their camp, the air felt heavier, charged with a new energy. They had just taken a major step in their journey, one that would force Zara to confront more than just the immediate threat. The decision she had made to fight back had set them on a new path, one where the stakes were even higher than before. Jack glanced at Zara, his respect for her growing with every passing minute. She had shown him what it meant to be a true warrior. Not just in battle, but in decision-making, in leadership, in the strength it took to fight for something greater than just survival. This was only the beginning of a much larger fight. The campfire flickered weakly, casting long shadows across the faces of the defeated raiders. The air felt thick with tension, as if the very atmosphere was holding its breath. Zara stood tall, her posture unyielding, while Jack sat nearby, his mind still racing from the events of the night. The adrenaline had finally begun to ebb, leaving a sense of calm, but also a quiet unease. The leader of the raiders, the man Zara had knocked out earlier, was now awake, his hands bound tightly behind him. He glared at the two of them, his eyes filled with a mix of fury and disbelief. His companions, still unconscious, lay nearby, completely at Zara and Jack's mercy. Zara didn't seem fazed by the man's anger. She stood with her arms crossed, her gaze steady as she looked down at him. Jack, however, couldn't help but feel a little uncomfortable. He had never been in a situation like this before, and he wasn't entirely sure how to handle it. "What happens now?" Jack asked, his voice steady but filled with curiosity. Zara's gaze flickered toward him before, she responded. "We make sure they know who we are. They came into our territory, and now they will understand that we are not easy prey." Jack nodded, understanding her point. But the deeper implications of what they had just done were starting to sink in. This wasn't just about survival anymore, it was about sending a message. Zara had proven herself a warrior, capable of taking down a threat, but Jack wondered what this would mean for them in the long run. Would the raiders return with even greater force? Would more enemies come after them? He glanced at the tied-up raiders who were beginning to stir. Zara's presence was as commanding as ever, but even she had to know that this move had consequences. The leader of the raiders, though angry, seemed to understand the gravity of the situation. He glared at Zara, his voice low but filled with venom. "You'll regret this. The Skarath Empire doesn't take kindly to threats." Zara stepped forward, her expression cold. "The Skarath Empire? You think I'm afraid of your people?" Her voice was like steel, each word deliberate and powerful. "You've crossed into my territory. Now you will answer for it." Jack watched as Zara's words sank in. There was no hesitation in her. She wasn't just standing up to this man. She was standing up to everything he represented. He realized then that this was about more than just the raiders. It was about Zara's identity, her pride as a warrior, and her unwillingness to bow to anyone, even if they came from an empire as powerful as the Skarath. The leader sneered, his defiance clear. You think you can defeat an empire? You are nothing, a rogue princess in the woods. You and your human companion are insignificant in the grand scheme of things. Jack felt a surge of anger rise within him, but he kept his emotions in check. Zara, however, wasn't fazed. She leaned down, her face inches from the leader's. I've fought harder battles than you can imagine, she said, her voice low and dangerous, and I will fight until I have nothing left. You will learn that the hard way. For a moment, the two of them stared at each other. Zara's eyes filled with a quiet, unyielding strength, and the raiders filled with hatred and disbelief. Then, slowly, he looked away, unwilling to meet her gaze any longer. Zara straightened up, her expression returning to its usual, unreadable mask. She turned to Jack. We need to move quickly. The longer we stay here, the more likely it is that reinforcements will arrive. Let's take them to their camp and send a message to their leaders. I want them to know that we're not afraid. Jack stood up, feeling the weight of what was about to happen. He didn't fully understand the politics of Zara's world, but he could see that this was more than just a simple skirmish. It was a challenge that would have consequences far beyond this moment. The Skarath Empire was not something to be taken lightly. Yet, Zara had already made her decision. Together they dragged the raiders through the forest, their unconscious bodies a heavy burden. The air was thick with anticipation as they reached the raiders' camp, a small clearing, with several large tents set up. There were no guards, just a few people sitting around a campfire, completely unaware of the defeat that had befallen their comrades. Zara and Jack approached the camp cautiously. As they drew closer, Zara spoke, her voice carrying the weight of authority. "We're here!" she called out, loud enough to be heard by everyone around the fire. "I have a message for your leaders." The group by the fire stood up, startled by Zara's presence. They reached for their weapons, but Zara's piercing gaze stopped them in their tracks. Jack could feel the tension rising in the air. These people weren't like the raiders they had fought earlier. They were more organized, more disciplined. But Zara was undeterred. "You're not in charge here," Zara continued, her voice unwavering. "I am. And you will listen." The camp fell silent, and the leader of the group stepped forward, his expression wary. "You're bold, Princess. You've defeated our men, but you've just made things worse for yourself." Zara smiled coldly. "I don't care what you think. I've made my choice, and I'm not backing down." Jack couldn't help but admire Zara's confidence. She wasn't just a warrior. She was a leader, someone who had fought for everything she had, someone who wasn't afraid to make the hard decisions. In that moment, he realized just how much she had changed since they first met. She had trusted him, relied on him in ways he hadn't expected, and now he was going to stand by her no matter what came next. The leader of the camp studied Zara for a moment, his eyes narrowing. "You're making a mistake, Princess. But if you think you can challenge the Empire, then go ahead. Let's see who wins." Zara's smile faded, replaced by a look of cold determination. "I don't need to prove myself to you, but I will fight to the end. And if you're smart, you'll remember this moment." With those final words, Zara turned and motioned for Jack to follow her. They had done what they came to do, sent a message, asserted their dominance, and left a lasting impression on the Skarath raiders. As they walked away from the camp, Jack felt the weight of the decision Zara had made settle on his shoulders. This wasn't just about survival anymore. It was about a future, one where Zara had the strength to carve her own path, and where he would stand by her side, no matter what. Challenges lay ahead.